Now departing Cultural Crossroads, where cultures and identities collide.
Welcome to Cultural Crossroads. I'm your host, Chantel DeJesus. If you're new here, we'll be exploring the unique stories and experiences of those raised in immigrant households. In each episode, we'll delve into the rich tapestry of cultures that shape our lives and celebrate the strength found at the crossroads of heritage and home. In this special episode, we're diving deep into an important and often overlooked aspect of the immigrant experience: mental health. We'll also discuss the intersection of cultural heritage, family dynamics, and the challenges of adapting to a new culture. So I invite you to join us as we share our stories and connect with others on our path to self-discovery and growth. I'm here at the RCC at TMU to find out more about cultures and people's experiences of growing up in an immigrant household. So what is your cultural background?
So I am Gambian.
Half Greek and half Trinidadian.
Chinese Canadian.
My parents are from Mauritius, but I was born here in Canada.
My mom is Guyanese and my dad's Grenadian.
South Asian, specifically India and Punjab.
Are you proud of your heritage?
Oh yeah, 100%.
I am. I think both sides of my family went through a lot to get where they are now, and that's why I am who I am.
I am so proud of my heritage just because of my parents. I feel like they're so inspiring. And even though I was born in Toronto and raised in Guelph, a predominantly white city, I feel like they made sure to really instill knowledge in me about my culture.
As a first generation, do you face any challenges?
I've always had to be the person kind of planning everything for my family, figuring all of our finances stuff out, and even if we travel anywhere, all of that stuff. I'm the one who has to help my brother with his homework, help my mom with her documents, all that type of stuff, because I'm the one who learned everything in English, grew up, and I'm more well versed in Canadian culture and how things work here.
I will say, just because of the cultural differences, I grew up in a very Western culture, and so I feel like my parents are very traditional sometimes, and that causes a rift occasionally.
Would you say mental health is openly talked about?
No, not at all.
I think anyone who is older than a certain age didn't really talk about mental health growing up.
It's upsetting, but I obviously understand that my parents and other immigrant parents come from very different upbringings and where that stuff was not talked about at all.
Now that we've heard from cultures all over the world, we can see there are quite a few common challenges and experiences we face. And now, we'll dive deeper. Today I'm here with my good friend Rochelle, where I will be asking her about her experience as a second-generation immigrant.
Hi, my name is Rochelle and I'm Vietnamese. I am a second-year media production student. My parents are from Vietnam and they immigrated to Canada because of the Vietnam War.
So as a Viet, what would you say is the most important thing you learned from your parents or culture?
I would say that my parents definitely had more struggles because in Vietnam, they were way more poor than we are. And I realized that I have such a fortunate life being born in Canada. I remember my dad would tell me stories how he would literally just steal things just to live. Honestly, I just learned that it makes me more fortunate about everything I have in Canada.
What would you say were the hardest parts of growing up in an immigrant household, and how do you think they changed or affected you?
I don't know if it's because it's an immigrant household, but I definitely know my parents were really strict on me. It impacted me socially because since I wasn't able to go out that much, I feel like my social experience has been kind of ruined. And I still struggle with being paranoid if my dad is going to get mad at me for going out late or something like that. Even though I'm 19 already, it's still scary. And I still have that thought, oh my God, he's probably mad at me for going out.
In your experience, do older people in your family openly talk about mental health?
I would say no, honestly. I've never talked about anything dealing with mental health with my parents. I think that type of topic is kind of weird for us to talk about. I don't think they really take it seriously. And if we do, I hear from my siblings, they'd be saying stuff oh my gosh, I'm depressed. And then they would be depressed? what do you mean? I'm depressed. I have to work. They just kind of like switch it and talk about themselves. So I feel like when we talk about mental health, it gets nowhere.
So do you think that they can change their way of thinking?
I honestly think it depends because my dad, no. I think it's just like because of how he was raised. He doesn't really have an open mind. And like when it comes to that, it's really hard to get through to him and talk about things like that.
Would you say there's a disconnect between people born in Canada and their immigrant parents, and why?
Honestly, since we're both different, I grew up in Canada, they grew up in Vietnam. Obviously, like, we're going to have different thinkings on things. I feel like stereotypically immigrant parents, like, they're going to be strict and more old-fashioned.
Was there ever a time where you felt left out or confused because of cultural differences?
I would say definitely yes. And so when it came to, like, for example, bring lunches or something, I'd be like, oh, like, I feel like my lunch is trash compared to theirs. When you see someone from the same culture as you, like, you would approach them more easier. But if you go to someone that isn't the same culture, it's kind of more intimidating because I didn't really have a lot of Asian people in my elementary school. But when I got into grade 6 and like high school, I feel like it was definitely better. Everyone was more inclusive, and it might be because of the generation, but I think now it's more diverse. So I don't really struggle with that anymore, but I think as a kid, that's when I mostly did.
Thanks, Rochelle, for being so open to talk about the good and bad experiences you had. And now, for our final segment, I introduce you to one of my really good friends, Chrislyn. We've honestly bonded through sharing our experiences with immigrant parents, and now she will be explaining her experiences with mental health growing up in an immigrant household.
Hey, my name is Chrislyn Farrow, and I'm currently a second-year student at Western University. I was born in Canada, but when I was about 3 years old, my family packed everything up and moved to the Middle East as my dad was offered a very promising job opportunity. Initially, they wanted to only stay there for about 2 years, but they ended up staying there for about 6 years. So when I was in grade 4, we ended up packing everything up and coming back to Canada. I am proudly the daughter of 2 immigrant parents. My dad is a Pakistani man who immigrated to Canada in search of a better life for his family, and my mom is an Indian woman who immigrated to Canada in search of a better life for herself and her family. When I think of my parents, I truly do think that I owe them everything in my life. Everything that I have is because of them, and everything that I am is because it is what they have made me. This being said, that doesn't mean that there have been no struggles in my life. Ever since I was a little kid, I would always get overwhelmed very easily. I was never able to control my emotions, and this spiraled into my teen years. As I began to learn about myself and the world around me, I ended up learning about anxiety disorder. When I brought this up to my parents, they were in complete disbelief that I was claiming to have a mental illness. To them, they equated mental illness to being crazy, and they could not fathom that concept that me, their daughter, could have any sort of flaw. This whole time, they just thought that that was my personality. That was the kind of person I was, someone who was over-emotional. When I entered my 12th grade of high school, my mental health completely spiraled. Not only was I a lot more anxious and a lot less able to hide it, I was also now beginning to learn about a new term, depression. Depression is something that slowly began to consume my life, but from how my parents saw it, it was laziness. It was that I wasn't working hard enough, I wasn't waking up early enough, but when you don't have a motivation to live, let alone get through the day, it's really hard to explain that to the 2 people who brought you life. When I began to speak to my parents about it, it absolutely broke my heart. Even though these were words that my parents needed to hear because they needed to know how I truly felt, it broke every single piece of me. I never wanted to give them the impression that it is because I had a horrible life or that it was because it was something that they did. It was fully impossible for me to explain that to them. My mom continued to blame herself, and my dad also continued to blame himself, thinking that they had never given me a good enough life. This slowly began to make me think that I was ungrateful for the amazing life that my parents had presented to me, but really, no one was in the wrong. When I entered university, I finally hit the worst stage of my depression. I was unable to get up to do anything, to study, and I would call my mom crying every single day, telling her how little motivation I had to get through the day. Eventually, I told them that I thought it was time for me to go and get a formal diagnosis. My psychiatrist did say that I did have severe anxiety and severe depression, and then she mentioned a word that I would never even think about: medication. Medication is something that my parents absolutely hate, and I knew that even just bringing this up to my parents would absolutely destroy them. Not only did my parents not understand my mental illness as it was, but they didn't understand me taking some sort of medication to fix this. It was hard to explain this concept to my mother. Eventually, my mom came around to it and gave me the green light to go on medication. My dad still completely disagreed, but knew that it was my life and essentially my choice. There's this really big misconception that mental health or depression in itself is just laziness, and that everyone has the same capabilities to go about their day. At the end of the day, I am grateful that my parents had finally opened up their vision and listened to what I had to say. The bottom line is that our parents really do want the best for us, in the same way that we want the best for ourselves. And I am forever grateful to my parents for giving me the beautiful life that I have.
And that's all for this week's episode. I hope you guys really enjoyed learning a lot about other people's experiences and really felt like you were not alone. So many of us experience the same issues, but sometimes it's just hard to talk about it. So I hope this episode inspired you to reach out to family or friends and start the conversation. Thank you so much for listening.